The day they told me I wasn't part of the family anymore, I knew it was the beginning of something I couldn't undo. It had been building for years. The subtle digs, the looks, the long silences that spoke volumes. But that day, on the eve of my 26th birthday, the final words hit me like a cold slap across the face. My parents, who had always been more interested in appearances than in me, had decided I was too much of a burden. After all the years of helping with bills, doing what they asked, covering their mistakes, I was suddenly disposable. I stood at the doorstep, the familiar scent of the house lingering around me, but it felt different now, almost foreign. My mother didn't meet my eyes as she handed me a suitcase and a list of instructions, not even a goodbye. My father, his usual stern face twisted with disdain, didn't speak. The weight of it hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been used, worn down, and when I wasn't needed anymore, they had discarded me as if I never mattered. It wasn't just the eviction that stung. It was the realization that they had never seen me as more than a tool to fix their problems. And when I stood up for myself, when I tried to assert that I was more than their emotional crutch, they decided they didn't need me at all. I took the suitcase in my hand, staring at the closed door behind me. This house, this family, had never felt like home. It was a place I had been tolerated, never truly accepted. I could feel the cold night air creeping under my jacket, but it didn't bother me. The chill in my chest was far colder than anything the night could offer. I had always tried to be there for them, sacrificing my own needs, my own dreams, and for what? A quick dismissal, when I finally realized I deserved more. As I walked away from the only home I had known, I realized something. I had spent my entire life running on empty, trying to fill a void that was never meant to be filled. The house, the family, the life I had tried to make with them, it was all a lie. They didn't care about me. They cared about what I could do for them. I had been the one to make sure the bills got paid, the one to fill in when things fell apart. And now, without me, they would have to deal with their own mess. It was time for me to stop playing the role of the dutiful child, the one who always put everyone else first. It was time for me to stop being their fix-it person. I didn't have a plan. But as I walked further down the street, away from the house that had never really been mine, something shifted. I wasn't just walking away from them. I was walking towards something: freedom, independence, whatever it might be. And I had no intention of going back. I stayed with a friend for a few days, picking up the pieces of my broken self. The first few nights were sleepless, filled with a mix of anger and confusion. I couldn't believe how easily they had dismissed me. But slowly, the anger turned to clarity. I wasn't just angry at them. I was angry at myself for letting it go on for so long. The truth was, I had been scared. Scared of standing up for myself. Scared that without them, I wouldn't have anywhere to go. But now that I had nothing, I was free to make my own choices. One afternoon, when the world outside felt like it was finally starting to make sense, I received an unexpected call. The lawyer's voice on the other end was formal, calm, but there was something urgent in the way he spoke. He explained that my parents had passed away in a car accident. The words hit me like a hammer, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I hadn't seen it coming. I had been so wrapped up in my own life that I had forgotten the fact that they were still my parents. Despite everything they had done to me, despite how I had been pushed to the edge, there was still a part of me that felt a strange connection to them. The lawyer continued, explaining that there were no other heirs, no other relatives who would contest the will. It was strange, but in the midst of my grief, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of dread. They were gone, and now I had inherited everything they left behind. The house, the money, everything. For the first time in my life, I was going to have to confront the consequences of their actions, but not in the way I had expected. The inheritance wasn't a gift. It was a chain that bound me to everything I had tried to escape. But as the lawyer read through the details, I realized something. My parents hadn't left me just their possessions. They had left me a legacy of manipulation, control, and emotional abuse. The fortune, the house, everything they had worked so hard to keep me attached to was now mine. But I didn't want it. I didn't need it. Not like this. Not after everything they had done to me. They had robbed me of my freedom, my independence, and now they were trying to make me pay for it with their legacy. I knew I had a choice. I could walk away from everything they had left behind, or I could use it to make them feel the consequences of their actions. The decision wasn't easy, but as I thought about it, I realized I didn't have to live with the weight of their control anymore. I could take what was rightfully mine and turn it into something that would give me the peace I had been longing for. The inheritance was a strange thing. On one hand, it represented everything I had ever wanted: freedom, the end of my struggles, and a life of my own. On the other hand, it was the final reminder of everything that had gone wrong between my parents and me. They had controlled my life for so long, using money and guilt as chains that kept me tethered to their whims. Now I had it all. Their fortune, their home, their debts. The very things they had once used to manipulate me were now mine to command. I decided to take the money, but not for the reasons most people might think. I didn't want a lavish lifestyle or a way to rub my success in their faces. What I wanted was closure. I wanted to prove to myself that I could rise from the wreckage they left behind and create something that was truly mine, not a shadow of their expectations. I didn't move into the house immediately. Instead, I rented a small apartment in a quiet corner of the city, far from the place that had once been my home. I knew the house would be mine eventually, but I needed time to process everything. To be honest, I wasn't sure I wanted it at all. The house felt like a tomb, filled with memories that I was ready to bury. But the money was something I could use to carve a new path for myself. It didn't take long before the calls started. At first, it was from distant relatives, people I hadn't seen in years. They wanted a piece of the fortune, of course. They were kind enough to pretend they were concerned for me, asking how I was holding up after the accident. But I could see through their facades. They weren't concerned about me. They were concerned about what they could get from the will. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't need their fake sympathy. I was done being a pawn in their game. Instead, I began to look through my parents' things, trying to figure out what I wanted to keep and what I could let go. As I sifted through their possessions, I realized something. My parents had spent their entire lives building a facade, a perfect image of a happy family, of success, of stability. But it was all a lie. The house, the money, the car, the clothes, they were all just symbols of the control they had over me, symbols of the lies they had told to maintain their power. I found their personal journals tucked away in a drawer, hidden behind years of receipts and tax forms. I had known they kept journals, but as I flipped through the pages, I realized that they had been keeping track of everything, every little detail of my life, every mistake I made, every time they had to save me from myself. It was almost as if they had been preparing for this moment all along, keeping a record of my failures, my mistakes, and my shortcomings. But what they didn't realize was that their journals were a testament to their manipulation. They had documented my life in order to control it, to make me feel guilty, to make me believe I owed them everything. Now, those journals were just pages of their bitterness, their regret, and their need to hold on to something that didn't belong to them anymore. As I sat there in the quiet of their empty house, reading their words, I realized something else. The fortune they left behind wasn't really theirs to give. They had spent their lives using it to control me, to make me feel small, insignificant, and like I was nothing without them. But now it was mine. Not because they gave it to me, but because I had earned it, by surviving their cruelty, by finally standing up for myself, and by letting go of the chains they had wrapped around me for so long. But the true twist came a few weeks later. Just as I was starting to get a handle on everything, the lawyer called again. His voice was calm, almost too calm. He told me there had been a mistake. Apparently, my parents had been involved in some shady business dealings before their deaths, something that hadn't come to light until the estate was being processed. The fortune they had left me wasn't entirely theirs. Some of it had been acquired through illegal means, and now I was at risk of losing everything. At first, I didn't believe him, but as the details unfolded, I realized the truth. The money they had passed down to me wasn't just tainted with their manipulation, it was tainted with crime. They had hidden it well, but their empire had crumbled, and now I was left holding the pieces. My inheritance had become a burden, not a blessing. I could have fought it. I could have taken the money and run, ignoring the consequences. But that was the old me, the one who had let them control me. Instead, I made a decision. I contacted the authorities, turned over the journals, the evidence I had found, and everything else I had learned. The money wasn't mine to keep. It was the right thing to do, even if it meant giving up the one thing that was supposed to give me the freedom I had fought so hard for. But just when I thought everything was slipping away, I received an unexpected message. A different lawyer, someone I had never heard of, reached out to me. He explained that there was a hidden clause in the will, a clause that none of the relatives or even the original lawyer had found. The clause stated that if my parents' illegal activities were exposed, their fortune would go to a charity organization they had secretly funded for years. This organization, the lawyer explained, had been working to help disadvantaged communities, something my parents had been passionate about but had kept under wraps. In a way, they had redeemed themselves, at least in part. I could hardly believe it. Everything had changed again, and in a way that made sense. The money wasn't mine to keep, but it wasn't wasted either. It was going to a cause that mattered, something my parents had been working towards all along, even if their methods had been corrupt. And so, in the end, I didn't inherit their fortune. I didn't get to keep it as a symbol of my victory. Instead, it was used for something good, something that wasn't tainted by their manipulation or their mistakes. The twist wasn't in the money I got, or didn't get. The twist was in realizing that, even though they had tried to control me, I was the one who had the power to choose what to do with their legacy. In the end, it wasn't about revenge or reclaiming what was mine. It was about creating something better, something that wasn't built on lies. As I walked away from the lawyer's office, a sense of peace settled in my chest. For the first time, I wasn't carrying their legacy with me. I was creating my own. And that, in the end, was the real fortune. It wasn't easy to let go. For days, I thought about what I had lost, what I had almost gained, and the strange twist of fate that had turned my inheritance into something much more complicated than I ever expected. The idea of the charity using the money to help others felt right, but there was still a part of me that wanted something more, something just for me. After years of sacrifice, years of being pushed to the edges of my own life, I had hoped for a different kind of closure. The money, the house, the power, I had imagined it all would be the key to finally breaking free. But I realized that the real closure came not from what I had inherited, but from what I had left behind. It wasn't about material wealth or possessions. It was about reclaiming my life, piece by piece. I thought I had finally moved past everything. But just when I was starting to breathe easier, a shadow from my past resurfaced. One afternoon, while I was taking a walk through the park, I received a call. The voice on the other end was familiar, yet it took me a moment to place it. It was one of the distant relatives who had tried to get a piece of the inheritance. His tone was different from the others, more insistent. He wasn't calling to mourn the loss of my parents or to express his condolences. No, he was calling because he had heard about the charity and what they were doing with the money, and he wasn't happy about it. It turned out that the charity wasn't just a cause my parents had secretly supported. It was something more complicated than that. They had been involved with a network of powerful individuals who used their charitable work as a front for money laundering. The relative told me that they had found documents, evidence that pointed to my parents being deeply involved in illegal activities, much more than I had originally realized. The fortune I had inherited wasn't just tainted by my parents' actions, it was entangled in something much darker. The money I had wanted to use to rebuild my life was part of a larger, more dangerous game that stretched far beyond my family. I didn't know what to do with this new information. Part of me wanted to shut it all out, to walk away from it once and for all. But there was another part of me that knew I couldn't ignore it. The shadows of my parents' actions were still hanging over me, and I couldn't move forward without fully understanding what had been going on behind closed doors. I needed to confront the truth, no matter how ugly it was. The next few days were filled with restless nights, research, and conversations with people I had never wanted to talk to again. The more I uncovered, the more I realized just how deep the web of lies and corruption went. It wasn't just my parents who had been involved. They had surrounded themselves with people who were equally as ruthless, using their wealth and influence to manipulate and control others. I found myself at a crossroads, unsure of what to do. I couldn't just walk away from this and pretend I hadn't uncovered the truth. But I also didn't want to be dragged back into a world that had only ever caused me pain. The more I thought about it, the more I understood that this was my moment to take control of my destiny, once and for all. It was no longer just about inheritance, or revenge, or even closure. It was about making sure that my parents' actions didn't define who I was, or what my life would become. So I made a decision. I couldn't erase the past, but I could control what came next. I reached out to the authorities, giving them the evidence I had uncovered, knowing that the truth would come to light eventually. I didn't want to hide behind the facade of a perfect family anymore. It was time to expose the lies, to make sure the legacy my parents had built wasn't one that would continue to hurt others. It wasn't about revenge. It was about putting an end to the cycle for good. The aftermath of that decision was chaotic. The news spread quickly, and soon enough, the world knew about the tangled mess of corruption my parents had left behind. But strangely, I felt a sense of relief. I had done what I needed to do. The burden was no longer mine to carry. The house, the money, the legacy. It was all being handled, and it wasn't my responsibility anymore. But it wasn't just the legal battle that changed things for me. In the months that followed, I began to rebuild my life from the ground up. I took a job that I actually enjoyed, something I had always been too scared to pursue. I made new friends, people who didn't know the old me, who didn't judge me for my past. I started to see myself as someone who was worthy of happiness, someone who had the power to shape her future, no matter where she came from. And then one day, as I was sitting in a small cafe, enjoying a quiet afternoon, I realized something. The past no longer held any power over me. The weight of my parents' actions, the shame, the guilt, I had let it all go. I was no longer a prisoner of their expectations. I was free, truly free, for the first time in my life. The phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me back to the present. It was an email notification. As I opened it, I saw a message from the charity that had taken the inheritance. They were thanking me for my cooperation and informing me that the funds I had helped them secure had already made a significant impact on the communities they were working to help. It was a small message, but it was enough to remind me that, despite everything, something good had come from my parents' legacy. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. It wasn't just a smile of relief. It was a smile of pride. I had taken control, I had chosen my own path, and now I was living a life that was truly mine. There was no more looking back, no more trying to fix things I couldn't change. The future was ahead of me, and for the first time in my life, I felt ready to face it. As the months passed, I began to think of my life as something entirely new. The weight of my past, the manipulation, the constant need to prove myself, it all started to fade away as I embraced my newfound freedom. I worked hard, saved up, and made sure that I was never again in a position where I would be someone's safety net. I felt like I was finally on the path to the life I had always dreamed of, one built on my own terms. But just when I thought everything was falling into place, an unexpected message arrived one evening. I had returned to my small apartment after a long day, settling in with a cup of tea when the email notification popped up on my phone. At first, I thought it was another mundane update from work or an automatic bill reminder. But this was different. The subject line was simple: Inherited estate urgent. I opened it and my stomach dropped. The email was from the charity organization that had taken over my parents' fortune. It was short, almost terse in its tone. They informed me that there had been an oversight in the legal paperwork regarding the transfer of my parents' estate. The fortune, they claimed, was never fully transferred to them. There were still unresolved issues in the will, and I was being named as the sole beneficiary of a separate, hidden account, one that no one had known about. The funds in this account were far more substantial than I had imagined. At first, I felt a rush of excitement. My heart pounded as I thought about the possibilities. I had worked so hard to get away from my parents' legacy, but now, it seemed like I had stumbled upon something that could give me an even greater chance at independence, something that might help me erase the last remnants of their control over me. But as I read further, My excitement gave way to suspicion. The message continued, detailing a series of legalities and loopholes that seemed too convoluted to be genuine. I hesitated. I thought back to everything that had happened. The fortune my parents had left me, the ugly truth I had uncovered about their illegal dealings, the relief I had felt after handing everything over to the authorities. I had been through so much to distance myself from their world. Could this be another trap? Had they set me up again, even after their death? Something didn't sit right. The email had a strange, unfamiliar quality to it. It didn't sound like the professionals I had been dealing with before. I knew I had to dig deeper. I couldn't risk walking into another mess without understanding what I was getting myself into. I decided to reach out to a lawyer I had been working with on a few smaller matters. He had been the one to help me with the paperwork after I'd turned the fortune over to the charity. His advice had been invaluable before, and I trusted him more than anyone. I forwarded him the email, asking for his opinion on whether this new claim was legitimate or if it was just another attempt to pull me back into the world I had tried so hard to leave behind. A few hours later, I received a response from him that shook me to my core. He told me that after reviewing the documents, he found something troubling. The account in question was real, but it wasn't a hidden fortune, as the email suggested. It was a trap set up years ago by my parents as part of a larger scheme to funnel money through various channels. The account was connected to a network of shady financial dealings, and the money within it was potentially tied to criminal activity far beyond what I had already uncovered. It dawned on me. I wasn't being offered a chance at freedom. I was being drawn back into the very same web of lies, manipulation, and corruption I had worked so hard to escape. The money, the hidden account, the legal complications. They were all a trap to force me back into my parents' world, to make me part of their legacy once again. I was furious. But more than that, I felt a wave of despair wash over me. How many times would I be dragged back into their mess? Just when I thought I was free, they had found a way to reel me in again, using the one thing that had always held power over me: their wealth, their influence, their control. But I refused to fall for it again. I had come too far. I had worked too hard to build a life for myself to let them pull me back into their twisted game. I couldn't ignore the fact that this account could potentially bring trouble with the law, but I also couldn't let it define me. I made a decision. I contacted the authorities once more, this time with concrete evidence of the hidden account and its connections to my parents' criminal activities. I knew this would be a lengthy process, but I also knew that it was the right thing to do. I couldn't keep running from the truth, and I couldn't let the past dictate my future. Days turned into weeks as the investigation unfolded. I worked with my lawyer, gathering every shred of evidence I could find. The authorities began to unravel the full extent of my parents' illegal dealings, tracing their connections to even darker organizations. It wasn't just money laundering, it was a network of corruption that spanned years, touching on everything from real estate scams to fraudulent charities. The more we uncovered, the more my parents' legacy began to crumble. In the end, the funds in the hidden account were confiscated, and the network that had supported my parents was dismantled. But I wasn't part of it anymore. I had made sure of that. I had taken back control, not by fighting them with money, but by refusing to be part of their empire. I had broken free, truly this time. After everything settled, I realized something. I had inherited more than just their fortune. I had inherited their mistakes, their lies, and their shame. But I had also inherited the ability to choose who I was going to become. The inheritance wasn't just money or property, it was a lesson in survival. I finally felt like I had truly come into my own. I wasn't defined by their wealth or their mistakes anymore. I was defined by my ability to rise above it all and build a life that was truly mine. I didn't need their money to be successful. I didn't need their approval to be happy. I was enough on my own. In the end, the greatest fortune wasn't the wealth I had inherited, it was the freedom I had earned. And for the first time in my life, I was truly free. As time passed, I watched my life transform in ways I had never imagined. The dust from my parents' legacy had settled, but the peace I had sought for so long was something I had to earn. The struggle wasn't just about the money. It was about the battle to finally stop feeling like a victim of their choices, their manipulations. It was about breaking free from the chains they had placed on me. Even in death, the legal proceedings had taken a toll on me, but with each passing day, I felt more like the person I had always hoped to be, someone in control, someone who had learned how to protect herself from the world's cruelties. The charity, which had become the unexpected beneficiary of my parents' fortune, was thriving. It was as though the darkness of my parents' actions was now being used for something good. I kept in touch with the organization, not out of obligation, but because it felt right. I knew that the money that had once been a tool of control was now being used to help those in need, and that gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't known before. But life was more than just moving on from the past. It was about building the future. And that's exactly what I did. I moved into a small house, one I could call my own, in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't a mansion, it wasn't grand, but it was mine, every single inch of it. It was a place where I could breathe, where I could finally be myself without fear of what others would expect of me. It was a place where I could heal. In the months that followed, I began to make connections with new people. People who didn't know me as the daughter of Cullen and Vera. People who saw me for who I truly was, strong, independent, and capable. I made new friends, found a community that accepted me without question, and slowly, but surely, began to rebuild the life I had always dreamed of. One night, as I sat by my living room window, sipping a glass of wine and watching the world outside, it hit me. I had finally achieved everything I had set out to do. I had reclaimed my life. I had taken back the pieces of myself that my parents had tried to steal. I wasn't living in their shadow anymore. I wasn't their product. I was my own person, carving my own path in the world. I thought back to the night I had been kicked out, the night I had been told I wasn't part of the family anymore. I thought about how much it had hurt, how deeply it had cut. But now I understood something. It wasn't the rejection that mattered. It was how I had responded. I could have let it break me. I could have crumbled under the weight of their abandonment. But I didn't. I rose. I fought. And in the end, I came out stronger than I had ever been. The phone buzzed beside me, breaking my train of thought. I glanced at it, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw the name on the screen. It was Tyler, my cousin, the one person who had always seen through the act, the one who had known me for who I really was, not just as the scapegoat of my parents' dysfunction. We hadn't spoken much since everything had come to light, and I wasn't sure what he wanted now. I picked up the phone, hesitating for just a second before I answered. His voice was soft, but there was a warmth to it that I hadn't expected. I know it's been a while. I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. Everything that's happened, it's been hard, but you've come through it stronger than I ever imagined. I always knew you had it in you. I swallowed, feeling a lump form in my throat. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those words until now. Thank you, I said quietly, my voice steady, but filled with emotion. It's been a long road, but I think I'm finally at a place where I can breathe. There was a pause on the other end before he spoke again. I'm sorry for everything that happened. I should have done more to help you. I didn't know how bad things were. It's not your fault, I replied, my voice firm. You can't save everyone. I had to save myself. He was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, his tone was lighter. You've done just that, An. I've watched you grow through all of this. You've found your way. The conversation was simple, but it meant everything. For the first time, I felt like I had truly let go of the past. I had faced the darkness and walked through it, and now I was standing in the light. The family I had lost wasn't the family I needed. I had created my own family, my own life, and that was enough. As the night wore on, I thought about everything I had been through. The struggles, the pain, the uncertainty. They had all led me to this moment. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. I had taken the worst thing that ever happened to me and turned it into something that made me stronger. And as I sat there, feeling the weight of the past finally lift off my shoulders, I realized that this was it. This was the life I had fought for. A life where I was free to be who I was meant to be. A life where I could finally say, with certainty, that I was enough. The future stretched out before me, full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to embrace it. Because now I knew that no matter what happened, I had the power to shape my own destiny. I had learned the hardest lesson of all. It wasn't the family you were born into that mattered. It was the family you chose and the life you built for yourself. And in the end, that was all I needed. The road ahead was mine to walk, and for once, I was ready to walk it with my head held high.